Chapter 8. B-Rank Ghoul. The ghoul's initial reaction was confusion. For a moment, he mistook Ryoma's Sharingan for a Kakugan. Ghouls could typically recognize their own kind by scent. But this boy, he smelled completely human. How could he have Kakugan? There was only one possible explanation. Some ghouls, especially those who spent too much time around humans, would eventually have their scent masked by the overwhelming presence of human odors. It made it difficult for other ghouls to identify them at a glance. Is he one of those? The man hesitated, abruptly stopping his attack. TCH. Just my luck, he muttered, spitting on the ground. Thought I found an easy meal, but turns out you're one of us. His tone was filled with frustration. A ghoul's flesh was nearly inedible to other ghouls. Their unique biology made human meat the only truly appetizing and nutritious option. While co-cannibalism, ghouls eating other ghouls, could provide some RC cell replenishment, it was a last resort. The taste was unbearable, and only the most desperate or power-hungry ghouls resorted to it. That meant, from this ghoul's perspective, Ryoma was a waste of time. Get lost, the man spat. This is my hunting ground. If I see you here again, I'll tear you apart. His tone was menacing, but Ryoma barely reacted. A hunting ground, huh? Ghouls often divided territory among themselves. The stronger the ghoul, the larger and more desirable their hunting grounds. Straying into another ghoul's territory without permission usually resulted in brutal fights. But Ryoma wasn't a ghoul. And those rules didn't apply to him. If he backed down now, he might as well call himself a ninja turtle. His response. He vanished. Without a word, Ryoma activated the body flicker technique. In an instant, he reappeared behind the ghoul. Fast. Too fast. The body flicker wasn't true teleportation, but to an untrained eye, it might as well have been. The ghoul barely had time to register what had happened. Fire style. Great fireball technique. Ryoma inhaled deeply, gathering chakra in his throat. A massive sphere of fire erupted from his mouth, roaring to life as it expanded rapidly. Heat waves rippled through the alleyway. The flames illuminated the ghoul's face, eyes widening in sheer panic. He barely had time to react. The fire engulfed him. A guttural scream tore through the night. His body was consumed by the inferno, skin blistering under the intense heat. Despite their enhanced durability, ghouls were still vulnerable to extreme temperatures. Their bodies could withstand blades, but they were not immune to fire. Still, the problem remained. Ghouls possessed incredible regenerative abilities. Even if Great Fireball inflicted severe burns, it wasn't enough to kill him outright. Ryoma needed to finish the job. His eyes darted to the side. A discarded crowbar lay on the ground. A perfect weapon. Ordinary weapons weren't ideal for fighting ghouls, but sometimes, blunt force was enough. He grabbed the crowbar and swung it downward with all his strength. The metal cracked against the ghoul's kagun, already weakened from the fire. The impact was enough to shatter it. The ghoul roared in pain. Ryoma didn't hesitate. Another swing. Another smash. With a final, brutal strike, the kagun was severed completely. For a moment, the ghoul's breathing was ragged. Then. Silence. Ryoma tossed the crowbar aside and picked up the severed kagun. If Quink's, CCG's specialized weapons, were made from ghoul kagun, then there was no reason he couldn't use it himself. A ghoul's own weapon, turned against them. He gripped the detached kagun and drove it straight into the ghoul's chest. The sharp appendage pierced through flesh and bone with ease. The ghoul gasped. Blood spilled from his lips. A final, dying breath. And then he was gone. Ding. Host has defeated a B-rank ghoul. Reward. 5 fusion points. Ryoma's eyes flickered toward the system panel. His fusion points had now reached 87. Only 13 more until he hit LV2. And when that happened, his Sharingan would no longer have just a single tomo. Ik chaps are short, but don't worry, and be sure to look forward to tomorrow because tomorrow, at the time the ranking changes, I'll do a mass release for this one. Open mouth smile, smiling face, pinched fingers. But for those that are a bit too eager to read more, here, you can read up to 10 plus chapter. Patreon. Zexxy. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9, Second Date with Rise. Ryoma didn't spare a second glance at the ghoul's lifeless body. Tossing aside the severed kagun, he picked up the crowbar instead. He had no intention of leaving any traces of himself at the scene. The last thing he wanted was for CCG or the police to investigate how a ghoul was killed without a Quink. Of course, technically speaking, his actions were completely legal. Actions were completely legal. Ghouls weren't protected under human law, and their deaths were rarely investigated in depth, especially when it was assumed that another ghoul was responsible. As long as there were no obvious clues left behind, a dead ghoul wouldn't stir up much trouble. And the Kagun? It would naturally decay and disappear without the host's RC cells to sustain it. That was precisely why CCG's weapons, quinks, required not only the Kagun but also the kakaho, the organ responsible for producing RC cells. Without it, a Kagun was useless in the long term. Still, maybe I should find a way to make my own quink. As Ryoma exited the alley, the thought lingered in his mind. Right now, having a reliable weapon was essential. Fighting ghouls with only basic taijutsu and fire-style jutsu was manageable, but it wasn't efficient. However, obtaining a quink meant joining CCG, the Commission of Counter-Ghoul, Tokyo's specialized task force dedicated to exterminating ghouls. Only official investigators, ranked at least second class, were allowed to carry their own quink. CCG's investigator hierarchy was strict, ranging from third class at the lowest to special class at the highest. There were also assistant investigators, but they were essentially non-combatants with no real authority. Maybe I should check out CCG sometime soon. 20th Ward, Movie Theater. After meeting up at Antique, Ryoma and Kamishiro Rise made their way to the theater. This world seemed to be set in the early 2000s, flip phones were still the norm, and smartphones hadn't taken over yet. Without easy access to streaming services, people still flocked to movie theaters. They bought their tickets and chose middle row seats. Ryoma wasn't particularly interested in the film itself, but since this was a date, at least on the surface, he played along. No matter how monstrous she was, Rise was still a girl. A cruel and sadistic one, but a girl nonetheless. Halfway through the movie, Ryoma realized something. The film's story was eerily familiar. The protagonist was a girl who had been mistreated by her family, used as nothing more than a tool to make money. Her parents favored her older and younger brothers, disregarding her entirely. As the plot progressed, a male lead was introduced. It was clear that he would eventually help the heroine escape her oppressive home. It reminded him of Rise. Ryoma knew her real backstory, far worse than the film's protagonist. She had been born into the Washu clan, the most powerful ghoul family in Japan. Unlike the usual logic of bloodline-based power, the Washu valued human heritage over pure ghoul ancestry. The more human blood a ghoul possessed, the higher their status in the family. Rise, with her pure Washu ghoul blood, was considered inferior. She wasn't allowed to inherit the Washu name and was instead cast out to a place called Hyakuya Garden. She was stripped of her identity, denied her birthright. Her fate. To be a breeding tool. A childbearer. Her sole purpose was to give birth to the next generation of high-status hybrids. If it weren't for Furuta Nomura, who helped her escape, she would have never broken free from the Washu clan's grasp. Even now, they were still hunting her down. That was why she kept moving. Why she continued to act recklessly, killing and eating humans without restraint. But her arrogance could only last for so long. Even if she was strong, she wouldn't be able to evade the Washu clan forever. As the credits rolled, Rise stretched lightly and sighed. That was actually really good. I can see why people talk about it so much. Ryoma glanced at her. There were faint traces of tears on her face, as if she had been moved by the film's emotional scenes. But he knew better. It was all an act. He gave a neutral comment. It was good, but the male lead was too indecisive. He hesitated too much. Rise chuckled. Yeah, if he had just run away with the heroine earlier, they could have avoided a lot of trouble. Since this was a night screening, it was already past 9 p.m. by the time they left the theater. As they walked through the dimly lit streets, they casually continued discussing the movie. Then, two girls in school uniforms passed them. Ryoma's gaze flickered toward them. Kirishima Tuka. She walked past them with her classmates, but for a brief moment, she hesitated. Her eyes lingered on Rise. Then on Ryoma. There was a subtle frown on her face. Rise noticed Toka's reaction but didn't say anything. Tuka, on the other hand, kept walking, but after a few steps, she turned back slightly. Her gaze was cautious, suspicious. She knew what Rise was. And now, she had seen her walking late at night with a human boy. That wasn't normal. Tuka, what's wrong? Her classmate's voice pulled her back. Tuka hesitated for a moment before shaking her head. Nothing, she said flatly. But as she walked away, her frown deepened. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 10. Level 2. At a quiet intersection, Ryoma and Kamishiro Rise came to a stop. Their homes were in different directions. Ryoma-kun, thank you for today as well. Rise smiled sweetly, her tone carrying a hint of hesitation. Well, my home isn't far from Takata Building Street, she murmured. Didn't a murder happen there recently? Her voice trembled slightly, her expression uneasy. Here we go. Ryoma immediately recognized the setup. That case, he nodded. I heard it was a ghoul attack. Yes, it's been bothering me ever since. Rise shivered, clutching her arms. I can barely sleep at night. Walking home alone this late, it's terrifying. She was practically spelling it out for him. Any normal guy would have taken the bait. Rise's beauty, combined with her vulnerability, would have made any man eager to escort her home. Ryoma knew better. This was the moment in the original story when Rise lured Kaneki Ken into the alley, when she revealed her true nature and attempted to devour him. At his current strength, he wasn't ready for a head-on fight with an S-rated ghoul like Rise. But before he could refuse, the system interrupted. Ding. The host has triggered a God-tier choice event. 1. Reject Rise's request. Reward. 1 fusion point. 2. Expose Rise's true identity and mock her acting skills. Reward. 10 fusion points. 3. Accompany Rise home and allow her to take a bite out of you. Reward. 100 fusion points. Ryoma narrowed his eyes. 100 fusion points. That was too tempting to pass up. It wasn't even a death sentence, just a bite. Thanks to Hashirama cells, his regeneration would take care of the wound. And with his body flicker technique, he was confident he could escape before she got carried away. Then I'll walk you home, he said with a reassuring smile. If anything happens, I'll protect you. Rise's eyes lit up. Really? That makes me feel so much safer. As they walked, Ryoma pulled up his system panel and spent all of his accumulated fusion points. Ding. The host has used 87 fusion points. Fusion progress plus 87. Current progress, LV1 87 100ths. Immediately, he felt the difference. His strength, reflexes, and perception all improved. Even without hitting level 2, the increase was significant. Now, he was much more confident about what was about to happen. The streets were empty. Most civilians avoided deserted roads at night for fear of ghouls, but that concern didn't apply to them. No ghoul in the 20th ward was foolish enough to target Rise. Any ghoul who crossed her path would become her meal instead. As they walked, Rise suddenly slowed her pace. Ryoma-kun, she whispered, leaning into him. Her body was warm, her voice soft. I really enjoy being with you tonight, she murmured, resting her hands lightly on his chest. Why don't we stay together a little longer? From an outsider's perspective, it was an intimate moment. But Ryoma noticed a small detail. Despite leaning in, she wasn't pressing too closely. Her hands on his chest ensured there was still some distance between them. A hunter's subtle maneuver. She's keeping me in position for the kill. Sure, he said, feigning nervousness. To complete the illusion, he hesitantly wrapped an arm around her waist, while his other hand rested on her shoulder, strategically placed to counter any sudden attack. Rise's lips curled into a smile. I like you so much, I just want to. Then. Her eyes flashed crimson. Eat you. She lunged, fangs sinking into his shoulder. Pain erupted. Ryoma gritted his teeth, resisting the urge to shove her away. Rise tore into his flesh, ripping a chunk out of him. Blood splattered onto the pavement. Ryoma let himself stumble, deliberately staggering to the ground. He needed her to take another bite if he wanted the full reward. But. Ding. The host has completed option 3. Reward. 100 fusion points. 1 bite was enough. The moment the system confirmed his reward, Ryoma acted. Without hesitation, he dumped all 100 points into his fusion progress. Ding. The host has used 100 fusion points. Fusion progress plus 100. Current progress, LV2 87 500ths. New abilities unlocked. 3 Tomo Sharingan, Hashirama Cells LV2, Taijutsu LV2, B-Rank Ninjutsu, Fire Style, Great Fire Annihilation, Fire Style, Blast Wave Wild Dance, Fire Style, Hiding in Ash. 3 Tomo Sharingan. His eyes had fully evolved. His speed, strength, and combat abilities had increased exponentially. But Rise didn't notice yet. She was still savoring the bite she had taken. Her expression changed. Huh. She ran her tongue along her lips, eyes wide with surprise. This taste. She had eaten many humans before. Some were soft and tender. Others were lean and tough. But this. This was beyond anything she had ever tasted. It was delicious. More flavorful than any human she had devoured. Her pupils dilated, a deep hunger growing inside her. The Washu clan had always sought to consume powerful flesh to grow stronger. And Kanzaki Ryoma. He was a delicacy. Her breath quickened, her body trembling slightly, not with fear, but with craving. She needed more. She licked the blood from her lips, then turned her gaze to Ryoma. A predator's stare. You, she whispered, eyes burning with greed. You taste amazing. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 11. Goodbye Miss Rise. Ryoma, do you know what my favorite scene in The Black Goat's Egg is? Rise's voice was laced with amusement as she took slow, deliberate steps toward him. It's the part where the black goat rips out the man's organs as he tries to flee. No matter how many times I watch that scene, it excites me. She let out a strange giggle, a sound that carried both playfulness and menace. With a swift motion, she pulled out the hairpin that held her long purple hair in place. Loose strands cascaded around her shoulders, framing her face. Despite the eerie veins bulging around her eyes, making her expression more twisted, the messy hair somehow made her look even more beautiful. But Ryoma, having already received his system reward, was done pretending. Facing Rise's predatory gaze, he dropped the act as well. Just as she prepared to toy with him before the kill, he spoke. You know, he said casually, you look even more beautiful with your hair down. Rise blinked. Her movements faltered. Normally, by this point, her prey would be trembling, eyes filled with terror, begging for their life. But this boy. He was calm. Unshaken. It was annoying. She didn't want calmness. She wanted fear, desperation, absolute hopelessness. And because of that, her interest in him began to wane. Her excited, sadistic grin faded into an icy glare. What nonsense are you spouting? She said flatly. I'm going to eat you. I know, Ryoma replied with a faint smile. That doesn't mean I can't compliment your looks. Rise narrowed her eyes. She hadn't even revealed her Kagun yet, and he still had the audacity to talk so casually. What's wrong with this guy? Her expression darkened. Your calmness is disgusting, she muttered. Are you not afraid of death? With that, 4 dark red Rinkaku Kagun burst from her lower back, writhing like deadly whips. The razor-sharp tips glistened under the streetlights. Of all the Kagun types, Rinkaku possessed the greatest offensive power, capable of overwhelming enemies with sheer speed and force. Rise twirled them playfully in the air. I'll use these to stir up your insides, nice and slow, hee hee hee. She licked her lips, still hoping to see something, a flinch, a twitch, anything that would give away his fear. But Ryoma remained still. Expressionless. Boring. She let out an exasperated sigh. Forget it, she muttered. At least your flesh will make up for the disappointment. Without another word, she lunged. Her Kagun lashed toward him, ready to impale his stomach. The instant she moved, Ryoma vanished. A burst of wind rustled Rise's hair as he reappeared atop a nearby rooftop. His body flicker technique had improved since his fusion progress advanced, allowing him to cover greater distances. He glanced down at Rise, who had abruptly stopped in place. Goodbye, Miss Rise. Raising a hand, he gave her a casual wave before teleporting again, this time to an even higher rooftop. Within seconds, he disappeared into the cityscape. There was no point in fighting her now. Even with his upgrades, dealing with an S-rated ghoul without a quink was still troublesome. Besides, CCG's ranking system wasn't based purely on raw power, it factored in the ghoul's threat level. Some ghouls were exceptionally strong but kept a low profile, avoiding conflict with humans. Those individuals were often rated below their true capabilities. Rise, on the other hand, was reckless. With her monstrous strength and relentless appetite, she had earned her S rating based on sheer brutality. Not to mention, her Rinkaku Kagun was on an entirely different level. It had the purest Washu clan bloodline, making it one of the most highly sought-after organs for ghoul researchers. She was dangerous. And yet, she had never even truly fought in the original timeline. Captured and turned into an experiment before she could reach her full potential, she never had a chance to showcase her true strength. That was what made her so unpredictable. For now, retreating is the best option. Dash dash dash. Rise clicked her tongue in irritation, biting her thumbnail. That little, goodbye, Miss Rise, had pissed her off more than anything. Her prey had slipped away. And what annoyed her even more was how easy he had escaped. What the hell was that? She muttered. His speed. His unnatural calmness. The way he had anticipated her movements as if he knew she was a ghoul from the start. He wasn't normal. He wasn't a CCG investigator, that much she was certain. Could he be? Her thoughts were cut off by an unexpected sensation beneath her feet. A shadow loomed over her. Her instincts flared. But it was too late. A series of massive steel beams plummeted from above. Rise barely had time to react before they crashed down on her. Boom. The impact shattered the pavement, sending shockwaves through the quiet streets. A cloud of dust and debris engulfed the area. Underneath the wreckage, Rise lay motionless. Alive. But unconscious. Even with her regenerative abilities, the sheer weight and force of the impact had been too much. The sound of the collapse echoed through the district. Pedestrians in the distance turned in alarm. Even Ryoma, who had already made it several blocks away, halted in his tracks. He didn't need to look back. He already knew what had happened. And then. Ding. The host has triggered a God-tier choice event. 1. Ignore the steel beam incident and go home to sleep. Reward. 1 fusion point. 2. Return to the scene and rescue Rise, preventing the future consequences of the incident. Reward. 10 fusion points. 3. Go back and lie next to Rise, pretending to be dead. Allow yourself to be taken in for Dr. Akihiro Kano's half-ghoul experiment. Reward. 50 fusion points. Ryoma's eyes narrowed. He had a choice to make. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 9 comments 0 vote. Chapter 12. Saving Rise. Ryoma stared at the 3 choices before him. If he were to think purely rationally, choice 1, walking away, was the safest and most logical option. Choice 2. Rescuing Rise would directly interfere with Furuta Nomura's plans, putting Ryoma in his crosshairs. Choice 3. Voluntarily undergoing Dr. Kano's half-ghoul experiment. That was the worst option. Ryoma already had the power of Uchiha Madara. Becoming an artificial half-ghoul wouldn't benefit him much, and the risks far outweighed the rewards. In the original story, Kano conducted thousands of surgeries using Rise's Kakaho. Only 3 people, Kaneki Ken, Corona Yasuhisa, and Nashiro Yasuhisa, survived. The success rate. 0.25%. A 1 in 400 chance. Ryoma had no intention of gambling his life for 50 fusion points. Then there was the issue of Furuta Nomura himself. Officially, he claimed that he orchestrated the steel beam incident to punish Rise for ignoring him after he helped her escape the Washu clan. That was the surface explanation. But Ryoma didn't buy it. Furuta had been raised in the Washu clan's twisted ideology. He was a man who had long abandoned hope in the world, and his true goal had always been destruction. His grand plan involved creating a dragon, a monstrous life form that would flood Tokyo with RC cells, turning humans into ghouls. For that, he needed a perfect test subject. A ghoul with the purest Washu bloodline. Kamishiro Rise. She was essential for Dragon's creation, just as the original One-Eyed King had been in the past. No matter what, Furuta was going to use her. If Ryoma intervened, he would directly disrupt Furuta's plan. That meant, whether he liked it or not, he'd be making an enemy of one of the most dangerous men in the world. But still. Ryoma clenched his fists. I still can't let this happen. He wasn't pretending that he had some grand moral reason. If it were any other ghoul, he wouldn't have cared. But Rise. Her fate in the original timeline had been cruel. After being captured, she was kept alive by nutrient solutions, subjected to endless experiments. Her kakaho was extracted over and over again, used to create half-ghouls for years. She was conscious for most of it. The physical agony. The madness of starvation. By the time she was transformed into dragon, she wasn't even herself anymore. The thought of that happening again made Ryoma's stomach churn. Now that he had a chance to change things. How could he not? Ryoma sprinted back toward the crash site. As expected, Rise was buried under tons of steel beams, completely unconscious. Her body was a mess, blood pooling beneath her, limbs twisted unnaturally. Any normal person would have been crushed instantly. But Rise's body, as monstrous as it was still alive. She was healing. Ryoma exhaled and cracked his knuckles. Then he got to work. Ding. Host has completed option 2. Reward: 10 fusion points. The weight of the beams was immense, but Ryoma wasn't an ordinary human. Madara's taijutsu. Even without ninjutsu, his enhanced physical abilities made the task easier. With sheer strength, he lifted and pushed away the steel bars one by one. Minutes passed. He could already hear the distant murmurs of pedestrians who had heard the crash. If he didn't hurry, someone would call the police, or worse, CCG. He crouched down and picked Rise up, throwing her over his shoulder. Then, without hesitation, he disappeared into the night. But before leaving, Ryoma glanced up at the top of the construction site. Furuta was gone. But had he seen? Had he noticed Ryoma interfering? That question lingered in his mind as he carried Rise away. Ryoma brought Rise back to his apartment. He placed her on the bed, making sure she was in a stable position before pulling up a chair and sitting beside her. Her wounds were already regenerating at an absurd speed. Unlike most ghouls, Rise's body healed at a monstrous rate. There was no need to stop the bleeding, it was already stopping itself. All he had to do was wait. And sure enough. Not long after, Rise's eyes flickered open. Her pupils immediately narrowed. Then. A surge of RC cells. Her Kagun burst out. Her eyes glowed red. In an instant, 4 massive Rinkaku tendrils coiled around her, ready to strike. Calm down, Ryoma said, unfazed. I saved you. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 12 comments 0 vote. Download the app for greater interaction. You can chat with me about my writing experience apart from the comments section. Zexxy. Download app now. Chapter 13, Invitation. You saved me. Rise Kamashiro's voice was skeptical, laced with suspicion. Even though Ryoma had told her to calm down, her instincts were still on high alert. The deadly Rinkaku tendrils emerging from her back were coiled and ready to strike at any moment. Yes, Ryoma said simply. I heard a loud crash, came back, and found you buried under steel beams. I pulled you out and brought you here. His tone was calm, as if he were discussing something trivial. And before you ask, no, I had nothing to do with it. Someone else did it. Rise's eyes narrowed. Do you really expect me to believe that? The suspicion in her gaze deepened. Though she had retracted her Kagun slightly, she remained tense, ready to attack at the slightest hint of deception. Ryoma sighed. Think about it logically, he said. If I had set you up, why would I bring you back to my own place? Why wouldn't I just leave you there to be found by whoever did it? He leaned back slightly, making no effort to appear threatening. In fact, if you want to leave right now, I won't stop you. He gestured toward the door. But if you step outside without thinking this through, you might not live long enough to regret it. A tense silence followed. Rise's mind raced. Everything he said made sense. She wasn't naive, far from it. The steel beam incident was clearly no accident. And now, Ryoma was claiming it had been deliberate. Her eyes sharpened. You said someone else did it, she said slowly. So do you know who? Ryoma hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know their name, he lied smoothly. But I saw them standing on top of the construction site. They wore a clown mask. I think they were the one who pushed the beams onto you. A flicker of recognition crossed Rise's face. Joker. She muttered. She had heard of the underground group known as Joker, but she had never interacted with them before. Why would they target her? Something didn't add up. And yet. It wasn't impossible. Could it really have been them? Or was Ryoma lying? Either way, she needed to be more cautious. After a moment, Rise's piercing gaze softened ever so slightly. Her Rinkaku Kagun retracted, vanishing back into her body. She was willing to listen. For now. Her violet eyes studied Ryoma carefully. Why did you save me? She asked. Her voice was quiet, almost unreadable. You know I was planning to kill you. Her words carried a weight that most people would have flinched at. But Ryoma simply shrugged. Well, you were my first love, he said lightly. And besides, you didn't actually eat me in the end, did you? So I figured, why hold a grudge? Rise blinked. Then. She laughed. A sharp, amused, almost mocking laugh. First love. She repeated, shaking her head. Don't tell me you actually believed our little relationship was real. The sheer absurdity of it seemed to amuse her. Ryoma chuckled. Of course not, he admitted. But it felt real at times. And hey, before I met you, I'd never dated anyone before. He gave her a lopsided smirk. At the very least, you made it an interesting experience. Rise rolled her eyes. That's disgusting, she muttered. Still. Her amusement lingered. But you're a strange one, Rise said, crossing her arms. Her gaze flicked to his shoulder, the spot where she had bitten him. You're not human, are you? Ryoma tilted his head. What makes you say that? I remember biting off a huge chunk of your flesh, Rise said, eyes narrowing. If you were a normal human, you wouldn't have recovered so fast. Ryoma simply shrugged. Maybe I just have a good physique, he said nonchalantly. But I'm definitely human. You ate part of me, didn't you? If I were a ghoul, I wouldn't have tasted that good, right? Rise paused. She had to admit, he was right. Ghouls had a distinctive, disgusting taste. But Ryoma. Yeah, she murmured. You tasted amazing. Her fingers twitched slightly as she recalled the flavor of his flesh. Compared to every other human she had ever eaten, Ryoma's body had been on an entirely different level. So rich. So satisfying. She licked her lips. Hey, since your body regenerates, she said, flashing him a playful smile, can I have another bite? Ryoma deadpanned. No. Rise pouted. Why not? Because it hurts, Ryoma said flatly. I'm not a damn buffet. TCH. Rise clicked her tongue in annoyance. She didn't push the matter further, she knew he wasn't someone she could force. But still, the temptation lingered in the back of her mind. Someday. If she got the chance. She would have another taste. Rise's body had mostly healed. She stretched slightly, testing her movements. All right, she said, I'll be going now. Ryoma didn't stop her. He simply nodded. But just as Rise reached the door, she hesitated. Then. She turned around and glanced back at him. Aren't you coming with me? She asked. Her voice was casual. But there was something in her tone, something unreadable. Ryoma raised an eyebrow. You want me to walk you home? Rise tilted her head slightly. More like, she said slowly, I want you to come home with me. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 33 comments 0 vote. Chapter 14. Shock. Rise Kamashiro's expression was unusually natural this time. There was no need to keep up her delicate and demure act, not anymore. Ryoma had already seen her true face, and she saw no point in pretending any longer. Instead, a faint smile tugged at the corners of her lips, though it lacked the warmth she used to feign. The attack that nearly cost her freedom still lingered in her mind. Whoever had planned it had nearly succeeded. If Ryoma hadn't taken her away in time, she might never have been free again. Rise strongly suspected that the Washu family had finally tracked her down. She had spent years on the run, avoiding their grasp, but perhaps her time had finally run out. Of course, she only had part of the story right. In reality, this wasn't the Washu family's doing. It was Furuta Nomura. The one person she least expected. And had things gone the way they were supposed to, Rise Kamashiro would have been nothing more than an experiment, just another plaything for Kano Akihiro's research. The thought made her stomach twist. Her body was still in a weakened state. Regeneration consumed a tremendous amount of RC cells, and since ghouls couldn't naturally replenish them, she would remain like this until she could feed. Unless, of course. She took another bite out of Kanzaki Ryoma. The temptation was there, lurking in the back of her mind. I want you to walk me home, Rise finally said. Her voice was casual, but there was an underlying tension in her words. Ryoma raised an eyebrow. Only if you promise not to take a bite out of me along the way. Rise laughed lightly. Not this time. Ryoma didn't find that very reassuring. Walking through the dimly lit streets, the two of them no longer played their little game of deception. Neither of them bothered with pretenses. They knew what the other was. There was an odd sort of understanding between them, twisted as it was. Ryoma remained alert, carefully scanning their surroundings. If Furuta was truly behind the attack, then there was no telling what else he had planned. But as far as he could tell, they weren't being followed. That was good. For now. It was Rise who broke the silence first. Did you know I was a ghoul from the very beginning? She asked, her tone laced with curiosity. The way Ryoma had reacted to her attack, it wasn't the reaction of a clueless human. Not exactly, Ryoma replied. At first, I really did fall for you at first sight. But after spending time with you, I started noticing things that didn't add up. It was a lie, partially. He had always liked Rise Kamishiro, but that was from a perspective beyond this world. Still, the lie was a convenient one. Rise considered his answer before nodding slightly. I see. I guess I underestimated you, she admitted. First, I underestimated how observant you were, then, I underestimated how strong you were. She tilted her head, violet eyes narrowing slightly. Do you still like me now? The question was blunt, cold, even. Rise made no attempt to soften her words. And don't bother lying. I never had feelings for you to begin with. Ryoma chuckled. It doesn't matter, he said simply. I like you, and that won't change. Otherwise, I wouldn't have saved you. Rise blinked. She wasn't expecting that. But, Ryoma continued, our little couple's game is over. From here on, I won't be bothering you anymore. His voice was calm, completely detached. Even though Rise had made it clear she never cared about him, it didn't affect him in the slightest. After all, their so-called relationship had been fake from the very beginning. So what was there to be upset about? Is that so? Rise's voice was unreadable. She didn't seem bothered by his words, nor did she appear relieved. Finally, they reached her home. This is it, she said, stopping in front of the door. Ryoma nodded. All right, then. I'll be heading back. Just as he turned to leave, Rise suddenly spoke again. Aren't you forgetting something? Ryoma glanced back. Rise's right index finger lightly pressed against her lips, her eyes glimmering with playful amusement. A goodbye kiss, she teased. Ryoma deadpanned. You're trying to eat my tongue, aren't you? Rise giggled. Oh my, you figured it out. She leaned in slightly. But you're wrong about one thing, she purred. I wasn't just going to eat your tongue, I was going to eat your lips too. Her smile was sweet, far too sweet. But the words that left her mouth were anything but. Yeah, no thanks, Ryoma muttered. With that, he turned and walked away without looking back. Rise watched him go, standing at her doorstep for a long moment. Then, with a small sigh, she stepped inside and closed the door behind her. The next day, after his morning classes, Ryoma found himself back at Anteiku. At this point, it was more of a habit than anything else. He liked the quiet atmosphere. It was a good place to read. What he wasn't expecting, however, was to see Rise Kamishiro sitting there. She was lounging comfortably in a seat, sipping her coffee like she belonged there. Ryoma raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect to see you here, he remarked as he approached. Rise glanced up at him, smiling as if last night had never happened. Why not? She mused. I do come here often, you know. Her violet eyes gleamed mischievously. Or did you think I only came here to seduce prey? Ryoma didn't answer. He had assumed that, but now that he thought about it, it made sense that she had other reasons for visiting. After all, Anteiku's coffee was unique. Unlike normal coffee, which ghouls found repulsive, the coffee here contained a special ingredient, concentrated human flesh particles. For ghouls, it was a rare delicacy. Of course, humans weren't served the same coffee. Yoshimura had a habit of making sure human customers received the normal stuff. Ryoma took a seat across from her. As he did, he caught a subtle movement from the front desk. Tuka Kirishima had been wiping down a table when she froze. Her eyes locked onto him, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, she looked shocked. Confused. Almost suspicious. Her gaze flickered toward Rise Kamishiro. Then, back to him. It was clear what she was thinking. Why was this human still alive? From Toka's perspective, Rise had obviously intended to kill him last night. So why was he sitting here, completely unharmed? It didn't make sense. Either. Rise Kamishiro had shown mercy. Or something else was going on. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. 26 comments 0 vote. Chapter 15, The Hanged MacGuffin. Ryoma could feel Tuka Kirishima's eyes on him from the corner of his vision. It wasn't surprising. She had seen him walking with Rise Kamishiro last night, late at night, alone with the most infamous man-eater in the 20th ward. For Tuka, there was only one logical outcome. He should be dead. And yet, here he was, casually stepping into Anteiku like nothing had happened. You didn't think I'd show up today, did you? Rise's voice was as teasing as ever, a faint smirk curling at her lips. Yeah, Ryoma admitted as he sat down across from her. I figured you'd be elsewhere. Hunting, to be precise. Rise, however, had stayed put. For whatever reason, she wasn't in a rush to find new prey. She took a slow sip of her coffee. I like this place. The atmosphere's nice. And the coffee's delicious. Right. Totally not because it's laced with special ingredients, Ryoma muttered under his breath. Ghouls couldn't digest normal food. But Anteku's coffee contained small amounts of concentrated human flesh particles, something only ghoul customers received. For them, it was a rare delicacy. Rise chuckled but didn't deny it. Ryoma stood up and walked toward the bookshelf. This time, he picked up a novel, The Hanged MacGuffin. It was Takatsuki Izumi's latest release. Rise, noticing his selection, raised an eyebrow. You recommended that book to me before, but you hadn't read it yourself. I heard it was good, Ryoma replied smoothly, flipping through the pages. Rise smirked. Then let's read it together. She didn't wait for an answer. Instead, she dragged her chair closer and leaned in, settling beside him. The scent of her shampoo, something floral yet faintly sweet, reached him. She was too close. But Ryoma quickly realized why. Rise wasn't just reading. She was smelling him. Her face was dangerously close to his neck, inhaling deeply as if savoring the aroma of a gourmet meal. Ryoma tensed. Great. I really am the tang monk's meat of this world. I'm starting to worry you'll bite me, he muttered dryly. Rise chuckled. Not here. Not now. Then, with an almost mocking innocence, she added. But if you're interested, we could go somewhere more private. Ryoma deadpanned. Yeah, no thanks. I have zero interest in getting eaten alive. Rise pouted playfully, then turned her attention to the book. Reading with Rise was distracting. Her presence was unsettling, yet oddly familiar, like a dangerous animal that hadn't yet decided whether to strike. Still, the book itself was interesting. Takatsuki Izumi's writing was dark, twisted, morbid. Which, naturally, meant Rise loved it. She was particularly fascinated by the gruesome details, her violet eyes gleaming with excitement at every brutal twist in the story. That part was amazing, she gushed at one particularly disturbing scene. The way he described the agony, the sheer helplessness. Ryoma gave her a blank look. You really like this kind of stuff, huh? Of course. She smiled sweetly. Don't you? I have limits, Ryoma muttered. Rise chuckled. Too bad. I thought we could enjoy darker things together. Ryoma decided to change the subject. After finishing the book, their conversation drifted elsewhere. Ryoma studied Rise for a moment. Her physical condition had clearly improved. By the way, he asked casually, how's your body holding up? Rise arched an eyebrow, then smiled knowingly. Oh. Is Ryoma-kun worried about me? Her tone was playful, but there was something in her eyes, a faint wariness. I'm fine, she continued. I still have plenty of stock at home. Stock. Ryoma knew exactly what that meant. The human flesh she had stored in her fridge. He kept his voice low, making sure no one else could hear. Still, he said, I'd be careful if I were you. That guy in the clown mask might come after you again. Rise's expression darkened slightly. You're trying to control me. There was a sharpness in her voice. She didn't like being told what to do. Not at all, Ryoma replied evenly. I just think it'd be a shame if you got caught in another trap. Rise studied him for a long moment. Then, just as her expression softened. Well, she said, a teasing lilt returning to her voice, I might listen to you, if you let me have another taste. She licked her lips. For those that don't know, Ito is her real identity, Takatsuki-sen is her alias that she goes by in public, and Takatsuki Izumi is the pen name of Takatsuki-sen. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. Just one or two review more and y'all bag yourself another bonus chap alongside 3 from PS Goals. Zexxy creators thoughts. 22 comments 0 vote. Chapter 16, Choices. Again. Rise had always despised constraints. Growing up under the oppressive rule of the Washu family, she had been treated as nothing more than a tool. A breeder. Something to be used and discarded. Now, as a free ghoul, her insatiable appetite wasn't just about hunger, it was a way to lash out. A way to vent the pain of her past. Unlike most ghouls, who only needed to hunt once a month, Rise hunted 2 or 3 times a week. Not for survival. For pleasure. It was why she had earned the nickname, Binge Eater. But despite hating restrictions, she found herself hesitating. The taste of Ryoma Kanzaki still lingered in her mind. She had never tasted human flesh that exquisite before. Would it be worth enduring a little restraint if it meant she could have another bite? Maybe. She wasn't sure yet. At that moment, Ryoma's system activated. Ding. The host activates the task and opens the god-level choice. 1. Reject Rise's request and stop interfering with her hunting. Reward. 1 fusion point. 2. Reject Rise's request but forcibly restrain her. Reward. 20 fusion points. 3. Accept Rise's request and let her have another taste. Reward. 50 fusion points. Actually, he said, smirking, if you listen to me, I might let you have another taste. Rise narrowed her eyes. Listen to you. Yeah, Ryoma nodded. Let's say. No hunting for 2 weeks. If you can do that, I'll let you have what you want. Rise pouted. 2 weeks. That's so long. How about 3 days? Ryoma gave her a deadpan look. That's pointless. Normal ghouls can survive on a single meal for a month. You're the only one who eats like this. His voice grew serious. And if that guy in the clown mask tries again, I might not be there to save you next time. Think carefully. Rise's playful demeanor faded. She hated to admit it, but Ryoma was right. If the Washu family really had found her, she was in serious danger. Her violet eyes flickered with thought, then she smiled faintly. Fine, she said. I'll agree to your little deal. Then, before Ryoma could react. But first, let me have a little taste. Ryoma tensed, watching her carefully. What kind of taste? Rise grinned. Relax, I won't bite you here, too many witnesses. She leaned in. Her hands slid around Ryoma's neck, pulling herself closer. Then, before he could stop her, her lips brushed against his ear. Bite. It wasn't hard, but it wasn't gentle either. Just a light graze, sharp enough to send a shiver down Ryoma's spine. His body tensed involuntarily. Rise immediately noticed. Her grin widened. Oh. She purred, her voice silkier than ever. So that's your weak spot. Ryoma shoved her away before she could push any further. Don't take it too far. His voice was steady, but Rise could hear the slight irritation in it. She giggled, licking her lips. Too late, I'm already satisfied. She stretched lazily, as if she had just eaten a particularly delicious snack. And now. Her violet eyes gleamed mischievously. I know your weakness. The exchange didn't go unnoticed. Other ghouls in the cafe were whispering. That human boy. Isn't he the one Rise brought in a few days ago? And he's still alive. This is the longest any of her prey has lasted. Some were even speculating. Could Rise actually be interested in a human? The absurdity of the thought sent a chill through the ghouls. Meanwhile, at the front counter, Tuka Kirishima observed the scene in silence. She knew Rise's nature. Brutal. Cruel. Completely in control. Yet here she was, playing this kind of game with a human. Something about it bothered her. Even if Rise was just toying with him, she had never acted this intimately with any of her previous prey. What was going on? Just then, Kaneki Ken walked into Anteiku. And froze. Right in front of him. The girl he secretly admired, the girl he had longed to talk to, was practically draped over another guy. She wasn't just talking to him. She was teasing him. Flirting. Kaneki felt his mind go blank. Behind him, Hideyoshi Nagachika frowned. Ken. What's wrong? Kaneki didn't answer. He just stood there, staring, as something deep inside him cracked. Rise had planned to push Ryoma further. But his annoyed reaction stopped her. She smirked. That was enough fun for now. With a satisfied sigh, she leaned back. Well, I'm happy, she purred. I got what I wanted today. She winked playfully. And now I know exactly how to get under your skin. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. Well, this one is a bit shorter than other chaps, but it happens. Zexxy creators' thoughts. 26 comments, 0 vote. Chapter 17. Realist Hide. Ryoma Kanzaki let out a slow breath, rubbing his earlobe with a napkin to wipe away the lingering sensation of Rise Kamashiro's bite. As I said earlier, just 2 weeks, he repeated firmly. Not a single human. If you break the deal, everything's off. Rise pouted slightly, but her amused smirk never faded. You're really strict, you know that. She sighed. But deep down, she understood why he was so adamant. Unlike most ghouls, she didn't need to hunt so frequently to survive, she just enjoyed it. In Ward 20, under the guidance of Yoshimura, the ghouls of Anteku lived differently. They sustained themselves using the bodies of the dead, suicides, accident victims, the ones nobody would come looking for. Japan, after all, had one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Men chose isolated places to end their lives, not wanting to trouble anyone. Their bodies often went undiscovered for days, even weeks. The ghouls of Ward 20 quietly collected these bodies, storing them for survival. It was how they avoided CCG's scrutiny, how they maintained the illusion of peace. But Rise. She didn't care about peace. She loved the thrill of the hunt. Her repeated killings had started drawing CCG's attention, making the ward more dangerous. In some ways, it had been her who started to tear down the fragile truce this place had maintained. But for now, she would play along. For now. Ding. The host has completed option 3 and received a reward, 50 fusion points. The system notification rang in Ryoma's head. He barely reacted, already used to these constant rewards. Instead, his attention shifted toward a certain bespectacled boy sitting nearby. Kaneki Ken. And judging by the burning look in his eyes, he had just witnessed everything. Kaneki sat frozen in place. His mind was a swirling mess of emotions, shock, disbelief, jealousy. And a strange emptiness. Kaneki, your face is red. What's up? The voice of Hideyoshi Nagachika snapped him out of his trance. The blonde-haired young man sat across from him, orange headphones resting around his neck, watching Kaneki with growing amusement. Nothing, Kaneki stammered, quickly looking away. Hyde raised an eyebrow. Really? He wasn't buying it. After a moment, Hyde leaned back and smirked. By the way, Kaneki, where's that cute girl from the coffee shop you kept talking about? Kaneki's heart nearly stopped. Oh no. Wait. He whispered urgently. Keep your voice down. But Hyde was already glancing around, scanning the cafe. Could it be her? He muttered, subtly nodding toward Tuka Kirishima, who was working at the front counter. Or is it her? This time, he motioned toward Rise Kamishiro, who was still sitting dangerously close to Kanzaki Ryoma. Kaneki visibly flinched. Oh, Hyde murmured in understanding. Bingo. Kaneki's reaction was answer enough. Which meant. Wait, Hyde whispered, eyes widening. That guy sitting next to her. Isn't he the one you told me about? Your book friend. Kaneki's face burned even redder. Wait, Hyde grinned. So you're telling me. He lowered his voice dramatically. That the girl you had a crush on is dating your friend. Kaneki groaned and buried his face in his hands. Kill me, he muttered. Hyde, of course, wasn't done messing with him. Without warning, he raised his hand and called out to the counter. Excuse me. Waitress. Can we get some service here? Tuka Kirishima turned toward them, walking over with her usual bored, mildly annoyed expression. What do you want? She asked. Hyde gave her his most charming grin. I'd like a cappuccino. Oh, and one for this guy too. He gestured at Kaneki. Then, without missing a beat. And also. What's your name? Kaneki's soul nearly left his body. Tuka blinked, caught off guard. Tuka Kirishima. Got it, Hyde grinned. Thanks, Tuka-chan. Kaneki kicked him under the table. GH. Hyde grunted, barely holding in a laugh. Tuka, clearly not amused, gave them both a weird look before walking away. Kaneki turned to Hyde, seething. What the hell was that? Why did you? Relax, Hyde waved a hand. It's not her, right? Which means. He grinned knowingly. It's Rise. Kaneki froze. Yes, he muttered, defeated. Hyde fell silent. For once, he actually looked concerned. Kaneki, he said seriously. You should give up. Hyde put his hands on Kaneki's shoulders, staring him straight in the eye. You saw them just now, right? That girl is way out of reach. And more importantly. His tone darkened. She has a boyfriend. And it looks serious. Kaneki flinched. Because it was true. The way she leaned in toward Kanzaki Ryoma. The way she bit his ear so playfully. The way Ryoma allowed it, even if he seemed annoyed. It looked real. Painfully real. Kaneki clenched his fists. I know, he said quietly. I've already accepted it. Hyde sighed. Good. Because man, unrequited love is. Before he could finish, he glanced at his watch. Shit, I gotta go to work. With a casual wave, Hyde got up. See ya, Kaneki. Kaneki exhaled and leaned back in his chair, trying to calm himself down. Maybe Hyde was right. Maybe it was better to let go. Dash dash dash. Meanwhile, at the other table. Rise had, of course, noticed everything. She smirked, resting her chin on her hand as she whispered to Ryoma. You know, she purred, if you hadn't stopped me, he would have been my next target. Her violet eyes flickered toward Kaneki-ken. He looks soft. Probably delicious. Ryoma sighed. I knew it. Rise grinned, licking her lips. Of course, no one would be as delicious as you, Kanzaki-kun. Ryoma's eye twitched. This woman was going to be a problem. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. I beg of you. Stop giving review for a while. Skull. The bonus chaps have reached 8 and if 4 more reviews are given, it'll reach 9. Skull. 33 comments 0 vote. Chapter 18. On the way to become a CCG investigator. Ryoma Kanzaki closed his book, glancing at the time. It's getting late. I have something to take care of, so I'll be heading out. See you, Miss Rise. Kamishiro Rise offered a sweet yet knowing smile. Alright, see you next time. Ryoma turned and left, but he could still feel her eyes lingering on him as he exited Anteku. Rise, on the other hand, stayed behind. With her usual hunting habits put on hold for 2 weeks, she needed something to occupy her time. So she kept reading. Takatsuki Izumi's books were dark, twisted, and deeply personal. She had only read half of The Egg of the Black Goat before, so she took the opportunity to finish it now. A story of a cold-blooded female serial killer and her only son, who initially despised his mother's ways, only to realize he was beginning to resemble her more and more. A fictional story, yet one that mirrored reality. Takatsuki Izumi had woven her own life into the narrative. The serial killer. Yoshimura Kuzan. The son. Yoshimura Ito. Only the genders had been swapped. I wonder how Yoshimura would feel if he read this. Rise smirked at the thought. Dash dash dash. As the night stretched on, the cafe finally prepared to close. Tuka Kirishima, now out of her work uniform and back in her school attire, approached Rise. Hey. We're closing soon. Rise looked up, blinking as if she had lost track of time. Oops, sorry. Guess I got too into the book. She smiled. Tuka folded her arms, clearly hesitant about what she was about to say next. You've been acting different lately. Rise raised an eyebrow. You've been sitting here reading instead of hunting. And that guy, your so-called boyfriend, he's still alive. Toka's voice carried a sharp edge. It was unnatural for a predator like Rise Kamishiro to let her prey live. Rise tilted her head. Can't a girl fall for someone? Toka's eyes widened. You actually like him? Rise's lips curled mischievously. Of course not. Tuka scowled, realizing she'd been played. Whatever. Rise chuckled and rose from her seat. Well, thanks for the hospitality, Miss Kirishima. With that, she left, a pleased hum escaping her lips as she walked. Only 2 more weeks. Then, Kanzaki-kun, I'll finally get to taste you again. Dash dash dash. Earlier that day. After leaving Anteku, Ryoma made his way straight to the CCG's Ward 20 branch. Tokyo was divided into 24 wards, but only 23 had a CCG presence. The main headquarters resided in Ward 1, while Wards 2 through 23 housed branch offices. Ward 24. That was a different story. A lawless, underground maze, inhabited solely by ghouls. Even the CCG rarely ventured there. But today, Ryoma had only one destination, the Ward 20 branch. As soon as he entered the main hall, he walked directly toward the RC scanning gate. Dash dash dash. The RC scanning gate was the first layer of security in any CCG facility. A simple yet effective tool, it measured RC cell levels to distinguish between humans and ghouls. Humans had RC cell counts between 200 to 500. Ghouls had at least 1,000, with stronger ones reaching the tens of thousands. Even a half-ghoul like Kaneki-ken, post-surgery, had a staggering increase in RC count. But Ryoma Kanzaki. He wasn't a ghoul. He wasn't even a half-ghoul. And yet, he had the power of Uchiha Madara fused within him. Let's see how the scanner reacts to me. As he stepped forward. Hey. You can't just walk in like that. A staff member immediately approached him, stopping him before he could proceed. This isn't a police station, kid. This is the Ghoul Countermeasures Bureau. Unauthorized civilians aren't allowed in. The man wasn't hostile, but he wasn't welcoming either. Ryoma turned to face him, his expression calm. I know exactly where I am. That's why I'm here. I want to become an investigator. The staffer's eyes widened. You. An investigator. He looked Ryoma up and down. You're just a student. Go home and focus on your studies. This isn't a job for people who want to play hero. It was a fair warning. The casualty rate among CCG investigators was terrifyingly high. They weren't dealing with normal criminals, they were facing monsters in human skin. Even the strongest investigators often met gruesome ends. Anyone with a conscience wouldn't recommend this job to a young student. But Ryoma's expression didn't change. I appreciate the concern, but my mind's made up. There was no hesitation in his voice. The staffer sighed. Fine. If you're serious, head over to recruitment and fill out an application. But don't expect an easy path. Ryoma nodded and stepped forward. Support and read advanced chapters on Patreon. Zexxy. Sigh, y'all are so damn persistent. Giving so many reviews that it went from 10 plus to 35 plus loudly crying now, I gotta publish 10 bonus chap on Sunday. Well, since you refused to do what I told you not to, I'll tell you, if you accomplish 1000 PS we're just 250 or so away before Power Stone reset, I'll schedule 5 chaps to be updated at the same time, instant access to 5 chaps, if not, then you gotta wait 10 hours before reading 10 chap cus 1 hour 1 chap sorta which I've been doing since the opening of this ACC.